Welcome back to IDS Retail Park, a podcast by the International Association of Department Stores. If you're new here, welcome. We're glad to have you. This is where we break down retail innovation, department store evolution, and global trends that matter to your business. Quick reminder, this podcast uses AI cloned voices created with human oversight to ensure quality and accuracy. I'm your host, Maya, and back with me today is Anchita. Anchita has been leading some really intensive research for the IADS on crisis management in department stores.
Thanks for having me, Maya.
So, Anchita, I have to say, when I first read through your research, it kept me up at night. You've been talking to department stores operating in actual crisis zones, war, economic collapse, the whole nightmare scenario. Tell me, what made IADS decide to dive into this topic?
Well, we're living in what experts are calling a polycrisis. It's not just one thing going wrong, it's everything hitting at once. The pandemic aftermath, economic shocks, the war in Ukraine, climate disasters. And these things don't just add up, they multiply each other's impact. We wanted to understand how department stores at the epicenter of these crises are actually managing to survive and operate.
And when you say epicenter, you're talking about stores facing some pretty extreme situations, right?
Yeah, that's right, Maya. Now we're talking full scale military invasions, currency becoming worthless overnight, complete infrastructure failure, the kind of stuff most executives hope they never have to deal with. But what's really interesting is that despite how different these crises look on the surface, the priorities are basically the same everywhere: people first, then assets, then operations. And above all else, cash is king.
Let's talk about that cash piece because I imagine when your national currency is collapsing, liquidity becomes more than just important, it's existential.
It literally becomes the difference between existing tomorrow or not. Some of the tactics these retailers used are wild, like deliberately taking on massive debt in the devalued local currency, then converting it to stable currency to pay back suppliers. They're basically turning themselves into financial businesses temporarily just to survive.
That's really interesting. What else did you find on Cheetah?
They were collaborating with companies from completely different industries, insurance companies, for example, to buy and sell financial bonds just to maintain liquidity. When the usual channels are restricted by government regulations during crisis, you get creative or you die.
So the normal rules of business just evaporate. Now, your research breaks down two main crisis management approaches. Can you walk me through those?
Sure, Maya, we identified iterative models versus protocol driven models. The iterative approach is more fluid. It's about continuous evaluation and adjustment as things change. That's typically what you see in politically volatile environments where they're not necessarily immediate physical danger, but everything's unstable. You can't really plan for every scenario, so you need strategic guidelines that let you respond flexibly.
And what about the protocol driven approach?
That comes into play when there's actual physical danger, bombs, airstrikes, that level of threat. You need comprehensive evacuation protocols for staff, tenants, visitors. You need procedures to secure the building, the inventory, everything. It's much more structured because when an air raid siren goes off, you don't have time to workshop your response.
That makes sense. And over time, I imagine this constant state of emergency becomes the new normal.
You've got it, Maya. And it also means you need to update your entire operating mechanism. The key is identifying warning signs early and documenting everything so you can refine your procedures over time.
Now, Anchita, let's move on and talk about the people side of this because I found that part of your research really moving. These companies are making some extraordinary decisions about their employees.
Yes, they really are. We're talking about decisions like whether to pay employees in advance so they can evacuate their families, whether to buy satellite phones so executives can communicate during power outages, whether to keep paying full salary to employees who are literally fighting in defense operations.
Wait, full salary while they're serving in the military?
Some retailers paid employees full salaries for 3 years while they were serving in national security roles. 3 years. Others helped staff relocate to safer regions at company expense, provided power banks and equipment for remote work, offered cars, houses, school admissions for their kids, whatever it took to retain talent or keep people safe.
That's truly special. It sounds like the business transforms from a profit seeking entity into something more like a social unit.
That's exactly what happens. People rally around the company because it becomes about collective survival, not just commerce. Some retailers distributed cash bonuses, started advocacy initiatives, collaborated with civil society to give employees a sense of purpose beyond just showing up to work.
What about relationships with partners, brands, suppliers, tenants? I imagine those get complicated during crisis.
Very complicated indeed, Maya. You're negotiating with brands, suppliers, tenants who all have their own policies about operating in crisis zones. Some retailers manage to keep all their partnerships intact and even add new ones through transparent communication and commitment to cooperation. Others lost partners who just couldn't handle the instability and pulled out of the market entirely.
Which must be devastating when you've built those relationships over years or even decades. What did you find about leadership in these situations?
Leadership becomes absolutely critical. And here's the key insight: it's not about being the most prepared, it's about decisiveness, mental resilience, knowing what you can control versus what you can't. You have to make tough calls for the long term well being of the company, even when every option looks terrible. And you have to stay agile. Plans that made sense yesterday might be completely irrelevant today.
So, after people, the second priority is protecting physical assets, the buildings, the inventory. What does that look like in practice?
In some cases, you've got dedicated teams living on site on rotation to prevent looting, rioting, or squatting. They're securing entrances, windows, maintaining heating and electrical systems under chaotic conditions.
Living on site. That's some serious commitment.
Yes, Maya, it is. But the threat isn't always physical. During hyperinflation, your inventory can become worthless. Government imposed price cuts sound good for customers, but they destroyed cash flow for some of these retailers. Sales went up, but they couldn't pay suppliers, stock got exhausted. One strategy was mapping product features to affordability. For fashion, they needed items under $30, exclusive brands, quality, differentiated from market. If it met those criteria, it sold.
What about the risk of government taking over the business?
There is definitely risk of government expropriation in politically unstable countries. Staying neutral, keeping out of the political spotlight, becomes a survival strategy in itself.
And then operations. That's the third pillar. Energy crises must be a huge challenge.
Maya, it's massive. Some retailers reduce their store footprint, only keeping profitable locations open. Others install diesel generators, put solar panels on rooftops. One reduced electricity consumption by 10% that way. They mapped the entire city's electrical network so they could switch between power lines when one went down.
That's some serious operational ingenuity. What about supply chains, Anchita?
Supply chains got completely disrupted, especially with the Ukraine war affecting global logistics. Retailers shifted to freight transportation, which increased costs but allowed for more diverse product mixes. When sea and air routes are unreliable, you adapt or you have empty shelves. And when you've lost suppliers because your currency collapsed and you can't order in volume anymore, you simulate purchases from brand headquarters to balance smaller quantities with variety and affordability.
How did marketing change during these crises?
Some stopped all advertising to avoid political targeting, then slowly restarted with in store and social media focused on quality messaging. Credit programs and promotions were stopped entirely in some markets because, with extreme currency volatility, you need cash flow daily. You sell what you can today because tomorrow the currency might be worth half as much.
Your research also touches on some forward looking concerns, particularly around potential new tariffs and sanctions. How worried should retailers be?
For retailers already in crisis mode, these global policy shifts could upend the fragile continuity operations they've built. It's definitely something to watch closely.
Anchita, What's your main takeaway from all this research? What should retail executives be thinking about?
These aren't theoretical exercises. These are retailers who've actually lived through the worst case scenarios we all have buried in our risk management documents. And the resilience and creativity they've shown, it's a benchmark for everyone else. Even if you have crisis management strategies and teams in place, learning from people who've been at the epicenter of overlapping political, economic, and security shocks is invaluable.
It truly makes you look at your own contingency plans differently. How solid are they really? Would they hold up under these conditions?
That's the question everyone should be asking themselves. And honestly, I hope most of us never have to find out. But if you do, at least now you know what's worked for others.
Well, the full exclusive article is linked in the episode description if you want to dive deeper into Anchita's research and the specific case studies. Anchita, thank you so much for sharing this work with us today.
Thanks for having me, Maya. It was great to talk through it.
Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, dive into our Substack for deeper analysis, and explore everything at iads.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of IADS Retail Park.